Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 34. And this is going to be our pre-Trafalgar Day stream. Obviously, Trafalgar Day is on the 21st of October. And today we're going to be doing Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar. To give people some time to get in here and all the rest of it, I am, as usual, going to start us off with a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wild. Your new gods sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly? Bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly profit laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come thou to search your manhood through all of thankless years. No age would give aught wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all the thankless years.
And that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. If you like good music, go and check out his YouTube channel. All right. Well, as I was saying, this is our pre-Trafalgar Day stream because our obviously Trafalgar Day is 21st of October, and that's next Tuesday, I believe, in Britain. And so we can't do it on Wednesday because we would have been late, so we had to do it today. But I will certainly be celebrating Trafalgar Day, which is one of Britain's great national days and doesn't get anywhere near enough publicity from the mainstream media and what have you. It's quite funny I'm doing this week because last Monday I did a stream with Morgoth and Endeavour where we were reviewing the excellent film Master and Commander from 2003, which obviously is probably, well, it certainly is the best film about the Royal Navy of Nelson's era. Far and away the best film about that. So, yeah, if you haven't seen that, do go and check it out. It's on Endeavour's channel on YouTube. Any opening things you want to go on about, Mitch or Tharium?
I would just say to avoid confusion. So, because people on Master and Commander stream were saying about how confusing it was that 1 minute you say Acheron and then Acheron, because there's two ships in the Battle of Trafalgar, both literally have the same name but different pronunciation. So we would say Achilles, whereas the French say Achille. So I think that's the first thing I'd focus on, just to avoid people getting confused. Like because we would say Achilles because that's the closest. That's because we're trying to say as faithfully to the original ancient Greek as possible, while the French just do their own thing.
Yeah.
I think there was one name. There was a Royal Navy ship, there was a Spanish Navy ship, and a French Navy ship that were all pretty much the same. And I think it was the Royal Navy one was HMS Hero, and I think there was a Spanish version of Hero and a French version of Hero. But because I'm useless at languages, unlike you, Mitch, I'm not quite sure how they would have pronounced them. So I think it was Hero.
Yeah, they'd be pronounced pretty much the same. They would pretty much be pronounced pretty much the same. Slightly different spelling when you write them down, but the pronunciation won't be that much different. So I'd just say Hero.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I always go for the English version. Any word like sallet, the helmet. You know, you could say, well, sallet. No, it's just sallet. And it seems we actually did just call them sallets.
Yep. Famous, the Brits, of course, are famous for mispronouncing foreign words, but you know, I think
they get it wrong. They get it wrong.
It's ironic with the ancient Greek ones and the Latin ones because we are more faithful to it than the French are. So
yeah,
absolutely, because French developed from like dog Latin, basically, didn't it? French and all the Romance languages, they didn't come directly from classical Latin. They came from a much lower street version of it.
Yeah, Vulgar Latin, which is basically
Vulgar Latin. Thank you. That's what I was trying to think of, Mitch. Thank you. That's
what even are the French? You know, because they're not really Celts, not really Latins, they're not really Germanics. I know nobody wants them as part of their group.
Well, this is a pre-Trafalgar Day stream, people, so you can't expect us to be too kind to the French today. It's very true. The Franks were Germanic people, I believe. If the Drive tells me.
Yeah, but would have come from basically.
Yeah, so they were Germanic, but and they basically pushed out or interbred with a lot of the former Gauls. So yeah, I don't know. And then of course Brittany got its name because so many Romanized Brits moved there when the Roman Empire abandoned Britain. So yeah.
Yeah, I would just shorten it. Say so. When the British arrived into Gaul, the people in Gaul were still speaking the original Celtic language that Vercingetorix would have spoken. But because the Merovingian dynasty are basically trying to take on a Roman legacy, the Frankish steadily over time adopted the what we know today as French. either Vulgar Latin dialect, although it's worth noting. It's funny how the French, for example, will claim Charlemagne as their hero. Well, Charlemagne wouldn't have spoken French as his native language. It basically would have been speaking a language closer to Dutch rather than French. So, that's one thing. It's only the Capetian dynasty in the 10th century that French is a main language spoken by the elites.
And then, of course, even up until the Revolutionary Wars in France, there were many languages in France and a great many dialects. And of course, the revolutionaries, amongst all the other evil things that they did, wiped all that out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know Richard Lionheart. He was a massive fan of what was called Occitan, which is kind of like halfway between French, Spanish, and Italian. Very good language for what's the word, troubadour, singing bard types. Richard Lionheart was very much a sponsor of that language, but French Revolution, it just wiped it out. I don't think it really exists any much more these days. You've also got I know Britain is done, but to be fair, the Britons are just massive shitlibs in a similar way to the Scottish and Welsh over here. So there's that. When you have the Basques, who, well, Basque, very much different thing.
And there's also the Catalans in Spain, of course, as well. Someone in the chat asked a question just before we started. Let me find it. Rangtawu7210, forgive me if I mispronounced your difficult name, says, hope you're doing well today. Before going into this, would this be comparable to Salamis for the Greeks or Blood River for the Boers? Yes and no. Trafalgar was a bit different because Salamis for the Greeks was kind of make or break. They had to win that battle, or the Persians were going to overrun them. And similarly with Blood River for the Boers, I mean, if they didn't win, they were all going to die, and their families probably as well, because the Zulus didn't take prisoners. And indeed, they'd already attacked a lot of Boer families and whacked quite a lot of them out in a surprise attack. Trafalgar wasn't quite like that, in that had Nelson not won, the French still wouldn't have been able to invade Britain. Britain had lots of other fleets apart from Nelson's.
Much like the Roman Empire, we just had the capacity to fill losses, just replace them.
Yes, absolutely. But what Trafalgar did do, and we'll talk about this more at the end of the stream, but what it did do was it secured for Britain command of the world's oceans for the next 120 years, roughly. And it was then deliberately given away by the British government in 1922 at the time of the Washington Naval Treaty. That's when Britain resigned command of the world's oceans, and we had no need to, even in 1922. But the British government chose to do so. And, you won't find me saying anything nice about pretty much any British government after Lord Salisbury in 1902. So, there you go. Adam, good evening, sir.
Hi, I actually missed the time there. I looked up, I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah, no worries. We haven't really even started. We're only talking about different stuff like, the French and...
the French aren't people, yeah.
Yeah, the French being strange because they're not Germanic and not Celtic, and I don't know what they are really, but anyway. But we're not going to be nice to the French today, guys. This is a pre-Trafalgar Day stream. Come on. Yeah. So, Adam, did you have any first thoughts on this before we start?
Well, I mean, just to come into the defense of the French, their admiral who was captured, it's a little bit up in the air in terms of sources, but I did find in a few places that apparently he got leave to attend Nelson's funeral.
Yeah, no, I could believe that. There was certainly some brotherhood amongst naval officers. So yeah, I could believe that.
Apparently,
mean,
as well,
don't- don't-
there was a brilliant quote I came across, because there were two brothers, weren't there, in the Royal Navy, who were captains of different ships, I believe. And one was particularly famous, and the other less. So their name escapes me, but the less famous brother was the one that captured the French admiral. How do you say his name? Is it Villeneuve?
Villeneuve, yeah.
Villeneuve, and he said the captain introduced himself, and he said, "Oh, so and so," and he's like, "No, I'm his brother," and he's like, "Oh, by God, there's two of you." I can't remember the captain's name. It's bugging me now. I'm trying to find it.
Pellew, maybe? No?
Maybe. I'm going to have a look. I'm just trying to find it now.
I know the Spanish admiral, Federico Gravina, he was mortally wounded, but he insisted that the Spanish court mourn the death of Nelson after the battle. Even though
Look, one thing I will make clear right at the start, none of us on here are going to be suggesting that either the French or the Spanish were cowardly or anything like that, because they weren't. The Royal Navy had a huge advantage in its outstanding seamanship and its outstanding gunnery, but that was a result of the Royal Navy being constantly at sea. Whereas the French and Spanish fleets were not able to do that, because if they came out of port, they would be attacked by the British blockading squadron and very often captured. And so they simply didn't have the sea time to properly train them in. But no one on this stream is going to suggest that the French and Spanish were cowardly. I mean, apart from anything else, being a cowardly enemy is not a very good thing to do. It doesn't make you all that great. So
does some of that come from Napoleon's stronger bias towards land armies and land supremacy?
Yeah, look, the Trafalgar campaign, as it developed, was largely as a result of Napoleon's ridiculous orders to the French admiral. And Napoleon, when he was working out how to move his army, the Grand Army, around, he was able to say, okay, well, we can do pulling a figure out the air 15 miles a day, okay? If we're marching at a normal pace, or if we're forced marching, which we can only do for a day or two, we might do 20, yeah? Or you can do a leisurely 10 miles a day if there's no rush. And, given the troops and taking account of what roads were available on land, you can absolutely do that. And you can say, yeah, this army corps can move 15 miles, 15 miles, 15 miles, 15 miles. So, in a week, you've got a pretty good idea of how far they can go. And Napoleon indeed used to pore over gigantic maps and put pins in them. And that's how he moved his army corps around. He thought you could do that with naval fleets and squadrons, and you couldn't. Certainly not in those days, because this is the sailing era. And so naval fleets are entirely, very largely dependent on the wind, but also tide and the weather. How rough is the sea? All that sort of stuff. And so it's a much less precise thing. You just simply couldn't control a naval fleet in the same way that you could an army on land.
Yeah, because I know the French had three major fleets. You had one at Brest, which was on 23 ships of the line. They had one at Rochefort, which was around 5 ships of the line, and then Toulon, where they had something like 10 ships of the line, along with 11 frigates. But the problem is the distance between them is such that you'd have to have a tremendous amount of luck to give someone like Nelson a slip and be able to try and unite all those fleets, because that's what Napoleon's plan was. He wanted concentration of force in the Channel. But that's easy said than done when you're dealing with the Royal Navy in 1805.
Well, yeah, and also bear in mind the Royal Navy's got more ships than the French, and were building new ships constantly. and there was a British squadron off every single French and Spanish naval base, of a different size depending on how many enemy ships were in that port. But as I say, this is one of the problems that the French and Spanish admirals had, is that they simply couldn't train their men properly. How do you train guys to use the great guns, the cannon, on ships in those days? In a port, you simply couldn't, because obviously you can't fire in a port. You know, even blanks really.
Yeah, the other thing is the French Navy has this terrible habit of forcibly recruiting men who don't even come from seaside towns. They're recruited as far inland as like Dijon, nearby the Swiss border. And you start thinking, what good would that be? Because you're effectively Royal Navy to something, was it 10 or 15 miles within the coast? Whereas in France, there was no such rule. You could recruit anyone. But of course, that's one thing that screws the French Navy really is. And another thing was most of like the a lot of the French Navy officers, for example, that were competent in battles of Chesapeake Bay in the American War, they were purged by the French Revolution. Villeneuve was probably one of the few aristocrats who never got gotten rid of, alongside his predecessor Latouche Treville, if I'm pronouncing that right. But yeah,
that's very true, Mitch. The French Navy suffered really badly from the revolution, because some of them had their heads chopped off, some of them were thrown into prison, and a lot more of them just fled with their families because they didn't want to get their heads chopped off. And so, and a naval officer is a very skilled chap. I mean, there's a reason why people like Nelson and other Royal Navy officers in those days used to go to sea as young as 11 or 12 sometimes, and pretty much always by the time they were about 13. It was because it took that long to learn all the skills you needed to know as a naval officer, because leaving aside all of the fighting stuff, you had to know how to sail your ship, which was a complicated thing in itself. In fact, a first-rate ship of the line like HMS Victory in the early 19th century was probably, certainly, in fact, the most complicated man-made thing in the world. And it took years to learn how to sail that ship properly. And it also took years to understand navigation, which meant you had to be able to do star sights and sun sights, and all. Celestial navigation in itself is a pretty complicated subject. And then, of course, you have the other aspects of seamanship, like understanding the wind and the tide and the weather and all this stuff. And that took years. And that's before you even think about actually fighting someone on your ship. So this is why young boys used to have to go to sea as trainee officers, as midshipmen. And if you couldn't do that, you weren't going to end up with good officers. And it's also why the Royal Navy had far more commissioned former ordinary sailors than the Army did. There were far more, like the Army had a certain number of guys who got commissioned from sergeant or what have you. Mm-hmm. But it was much more common in the Royal Navy, and there was even a pretty regularized way of doing it by becoming a master's mate, which was an equivalent of a midshipman. And from there, you could be commissioned in the same way as a midshipman was. And most of those guys were guys who started off as ordinary sailors. In fact, the very famous explorer Captain Cook, that's how he was commissioned.
Yeah, didn't he start off on coal boxes, Captain Cook?
Yeah, he started off on coal ships,
right?
Sailing coal from Newcastle down to London. And HMS Endeavour, for example, and there's a very accurate and fine replica of her, which is Australian and mostly based in Sydney, which I've sailed on. And that is one of those ships. And the reason he liked them is they're flat-bottomed, so it means if you put them somewhere where the tide goes out, they don't tip over. And also, because they were designed for hauling coal, they've got a very large cargo capacity, which if you're going exploring on the far side of the world, as Cook was, is a very useful thing to have, obviously, because you can put enough supplies in there to feed and water your crew and what have you. So yeah, that stuff. Hang on, I'll put Mitch's thing up. There you go. This is a map of southeast England, Ireland, and France and Spain, and obviously it's got the major ports marked on it. Gibraltar, of course, down here was British. The Spanish had tried to take that back earlier and failed, and so that was still British.
How come? I mean, this is going back a bit, but how come they were able to take back Minorca, but they couldn't take Gibraltar?
We gave them Minorca.
Surely,
no, we gave them Minorca.
Oh, am I getting it mixed up with another island? There was an island we fought, which they did manage to take back off us. I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
no,
Minorca.
in the Med.
Yeah, but the point is, Britain gave it up and said, "No, okay, we won't take it back." Like, in the 18th century, before the French Revolution, peace treaties were pretty civilized, shall we say, and countries would just trade possessions overseas. It was probably a mistake to give up Minorca, to be honest with you. And if you're a Jack Aubrey Master and Commander fan, and you've read the books, you will realize that the first one of those, which is called Master and Commander, but isn't the same as the film at all, is actually Jack is based in Minorca at that stage.
That is a good book, that first one.
Yeah, it is. I think they're all pretty good, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you can kind of feel the autism of the author coming through, where he goes into like such exacting details on like.
Well, one of the things he did, I was saying this on the Morgoth and Endeavour stream about Master and Commander. One of the things that Patrick O'Brien did was he went through the Naval Chronicle, and the Naval Chronicle was a monthly publication in Britain, mostly read by naval officers, but also by the general public. And it was basically just stories of what the Royal Navy had been doing around the world, written by officers of the Royal Navy. And Patrick O'Brien got many of his battles and actions, including some of the landing actions he does and stuff, from that. So
yeah, if you have the, I mean, I've got the, is it the 50th anniversary edition of Master and Commander, the book, but it comes with a quite a large essay that he wrote that I actually went through some excerpts of this last time we did this. And it is quite interesting. He really did know his stuff when he was writing those books.
He did a lot of research. He really did. And I look, he's probably my favorite author, I guess. But they are really very fine historical novels. I mean, at the time he was writing them, and he started, I think, in the 60s writing Master and Commander. Even at the time he was writing them, there were much more academic people than I am who were saying that, sometimes somebody like Patrick O'Brien really ought to win the Booker Prize, but of course he was not politically correct enough for that, because he was a very good writer. I know that people have sometimes criticized stuff about his private life, but I don't think that makes any difference. I read his books. I really don't care what he did himself or didn't do himself much. I just read him as a good writer, basically. I was quite surprised because Bo Day, History Bro, did a video on Lotus Eaters devoted to slagging off Patrick O'Brien. I couldn't see why, to be honest with you. I didn't see the point of that. But
no, I haven't seen that. But what's the issue people have with him?
Oh, well, he was less than honest sometimes about some of the things he had and hadn't done.
Oh, okay.
And he also changed his name. He wasn't originally called Patrick O'Brien.
It's like a reverse fellow Fenian.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't Irish at all. Although eventually, when he died, he was actually working at the University of in Dublin. Yeah, he wasn't Irish. He was an Englishman. But yeah, he lived most of his life in the south of France. So yeah, didn't have much success for years and years and years. And even when he published Master and Commander in about 1969, Sir Francis Chichester, who people may or may not know because he was the first guy to sail around the world single-handed. He was an Englishman, of course. Sir Francis Chichester described that as the finest sea novel he'd ever read. But even then, he wasn't really making that much money. It was only when he'd written about, because there's about 20 books in the whole series. And plus he wrote a couple of others before that about the Royal Navy, although set a bit earlier in the 18th century, which are also worth reading. It was only after he'd written about at least half the series, about 10 books, he suddenly started getting popular in the US, and that started making him money. And of course, he was getting popular in Britain at the same time, but you know, the US is a big market, so yeah. But I think it's very unfair that people go on about what he didn't do himself, because you know, the guy's an author. I don't really care, to be honest with you. As far as I know, he didn't do any harm to anybody, so who gives a shit, you know? But yeah, so but anyway, a bit off topic. Key Buckley says the British ships were copper bottomed. This is true, and this is still a saying, of course, in Britain at least. You say if something's good, you say it's copper bottomed if it's good and safe. And yeah, British ships were indeed coppered on their bottom, and that meant they didn't get shipworms and all this stuff, and not so much barnacles and marine growth, which would slow your ship down. And also, of course, as I say, shipworms were really quite dangerous in those days, because they could actually, the bottom could fall out of your ship if it was left long enough. So,
I always thought that must have been very expensive. Like, that would have added a lot to the cost of,
Oh yeah,
like, naval production.
Yeah, but it was well worth it, because it meant you had to take your ship into dockyards far less often, into dry dock to clean the bottom. And also it made the ships faster sailing as well. And obviously, when you're chasing an enemy, the faster you sail, the more chance you got to catch him.
Yeah, I know that's one thing about, because I was watching Info earlier, and he said about how at this time one standard British tactic was to fight on the leeward side when engaging the enemy, which so basically wind goes against you now. That has good benefits, because you take, for example, HMS Victory with her 36 pounders on the lower deck. If she was sailing with a wind, she'd have to deal with more choppier seas somewhat than on the leeward side. So she's able to fully exploit her firepower, fighting against Bucentaur and Saint-Testament Trinidad in the battle. Whereas if she was fighting on the windward side, she'd have to be closing her portholes to some of her heavier guns to deal with the waves. Otherwise, the water gets in, and HMS Victory would become like the Mary Rose under Henry VIII. So,
yeah, absolutely. And of course, HMS Victory was famous as a good sailor. You know, there were ships that had reputations as good and bad sailors, like in terms of, like, they were quick and handy and would answer the helm quickly and all this kind of stuff. And HMS Victory always had an excellent reputation as a ship.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn that. I thought HMS Victory was commissioned in like 1790 or something. It turns out it was during the 7 Years' War. She was commissioned.
Yep. She was pretty old, even at Trafalgar.
Yeah, because usually life expectancy of a ship back then was like, what, 15 years or 20 years, something like that.
No, Mitch. If they were built of seasoned timbers, sometimes in war they build ships from unseasoned timber as an emergency measure, and those ships wouldn't last very long. But if they were built of well-seasoned timbers, as Victory was, a ship could easily last 50 or 60 years back then, and they would put them in ordinary, as it was called, quite often when there was no war, and that meant they were in reserve basically, and the masts would even sometimes be taken off of them, and they'd be roofed, so that the rain and stuff didn't get to them. And then if a war breaks out, then you remove all that top hamper, put the mast back in, and you've got your warship again. In fact, if you go to Scotland, there's a frigate called HMS Unicorn, which is based in Scotland somewhere, and I can't remember where off the top of my head, but a Google search will find it for you. And HMS Unicorn was never actually commissioned. She was always kept in ordinary. And so you can go and see her today, and she's still got like a kind of roof over her with no masts. But what this means is that she's one of the most original 19th century frigates in the world, because she's never had to be repaired. So she's actually well worth visiting. She's a sister ship of HMS Trincomalee, which is a beautiful Royal Navy sailing frigate from 1816, I think, roughly. She was just too late for the Napoleonic Wars. But she's a 38-gun British sailing frigate, and she's in Hartlepool, I believe. Mitch says Dundee is where Unicorn is. Thank you, Mitch. But yeah, Hartlepool is where HMS Trincomalee is, and if you live near there, do go and visit her. She's an absolutely beautiful sailing frigate, and much bigger than HMS Surprise was supposed to be, by the way. But yeah. So yeah, they were indeed copper-bottomed. She was the flag at Cape St. Vincent as well. Key Buckley is talking about HMS Victory, of course. Yeah, HMS Victory was in quite a lot of wars and quite a lot of battles. But she had a very good reputation as a ship. She was quite, for a first rate, she was quite fast and quite maneuverable. And of course, I suppose we need to talk a little bit about the ships of the day.
Isn't the Victory? Isn't she technically still?
She's still
in
service,
action.
Yeah. She's the oldest commissioned warship in the world.
Yeah, we're gonna roll her out for Operation Remigration. Yeah,
she'll be defending the channel. Yeah,
the way the Royal Navy's going at the moment, mate, she'll be the last ship in the Royal Navy.
They'll have to get all 50 admirals on her.
Yeah, they'll have to get all 50. They'll be able to crew with admirals and captains. Because no more ships in the Royal Navy, thanks to the British government. But anyway, that's a bit off topic. But yeah, we should probably talk about the ships a bit. HMS Victory is a first-rate ship of the line. First-rate ship of the line had 3 main gun decks, and usually 100 guns. A second-rate ship of the line was also a 3-decker, but usually had about 90 guns, maybe 94, something like that. Then you had third rates. Now, third rates were the most common sailing battleship, line of battleship. And most of them were 74s, which are 2-deckers. But the French also built some 80s. And the Brits had some 80s that we'd captured from the French. The Royal Navy in the Nelson era had a lot of captured French and Spanish ships, because we normally beat them. So that's a third rate. And also I think a 64 was still a third rate, but a 64 by the time of Trafalgar in 1805, 64s were becoming a bit out of date. They tended to be used as flagships on far-flung foreign stations that mostly had frigates and sloops and so on. But there was 164 at Trafalgar, HMS Africa, and HMS Africa arrived late, and so she wasn't in the 2 main attacking British columns, which we'll talk about in due course. But she happily sailed down half the Franco-Spanish line exchanging broadsides with every French and Spanish ship she passed, including the Spanish had a gigantic ship called the Santissima Trinidad, which was a 4-decker with 130 guns on it, and a terrible sailor. Like, she used to sail like a barn door, basically, because she was so big and tall. But she did have 130 guns, and the little 64-gun HMS Africa exchanged broadsides with her as she went down the Franco-Spanish line. So yeah, a gallant little ship.
I wonder what happened to the captain of that ship, like Henry Digby. Like, I wonder if he got chastised for it, or did he get a medal for it?
No, he wouldn't have got into trouble because he didn't do anything wrong. He engaged the enemy.
Because Epic History said apparently he deliberately misinterpreted orders of Nelson to disengage. So,
well, it may be, but Nelson wouldn't. Well, first of all, Nelson didn't survive the battle, of course, sadly, and secondly, Nelson was not known for obeying orders all the time himself. So I doubt he would have done anything to him, even if he had survived. To be honest,
like, the general attitude in the Navy at the time was, if you're not suicidally aggressive, you're doing it wrong.
Yes, I mean, if you look at the thumbnail for this stream, that was what Nelson said to the enemy. Said to his captains, I beg your pardon. He said, in case signals are not seen or clearly understood, no captain will do very wrong if he engages an enemy. You know, puts himself next to an enemy ship. That's all he expected his captains to do.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a massive difference between Nelson and Villeneuve, because Villeneuve, as I was saying before, like, he just kept losing his nerve whenever Nelson was around. Like, he just still had PTSD from Manoil.
Yeah,
pretty much.
I think most Franco-Spanish admirals lost their nerve when Nelson was around, to be honest. This came up when I was doing the Master and Commander stream with Morgoth and Endeavour. Nelson was already famous. Certainly, I mean, he was famous in England, of course, and Britain, but he was certainly famous amongst naval officers around the world by this time, because he'd already done many remarkable feats. The Battle of the Nile, which was an annihilating battle, which was always what Nelson aimed for. Copenhagen, where Nelson destroyed the Danish fleet to stop Napoleon getting hold of them, basically. And things like Cape St. Vincent, for example. At Cape St. Vincent, Nelson took his 74-gun ship, and he boarded a Spanish 74, captured her with his officers and men, of course, and then from the deck of the Spanish 74, he boarded a Spanish first-rate 100-gun ship and captured that as well. Yeah. And they called the 74 Nelson's patent bridge for boarding first rates. He was a very, very famous naval officer, even before Trafalgar.
Yeah, it was because there's a famous quote. Because Nelson was, he wrote to that Lady Hamilton, who was in southern Italy, I believe she was. He said basically, there was something of a Nelson touch, or a Nelson, something like a Nelson touch, where if sailors knew they were fighting alongside Nelson, it was like electric shock to them, that they all just got excited because that was just renowned, and just how well known he was.
A lot of any sort of great commanders throughout history, just they know they're going to win every battle, all their soldiers, and that just counts so much.
Yeah, Nelson inspired enormous amounts of confidence, of course. And not that he never failed, because he did once in a while, but not usually at sea. It was usually when he was attacking a fortress or something like this.
Yeah, it's I know Wellington used to say Napoleon was like having 40,000 men on a battlefield in terms of his effects.
Yeah.
I imagine you could say that having Nelson upon the what would be the word? You can't even say battlefield, I suppose. But basically, I imagine Nelson would have a similar effect. Like, you'd be like having 40 ships of a line if you had Nelson on your side.
Yeah, he was a great hero. I mean, I posted about this on X. One of the really unusual things about Nelson was that everybody loved him. Like, you could be an ordinary seaman or an able seaman, you could be a petty officer, you could be a lieutenant, you could be a post captain, you could be an admiral even. And it's almost impossible to find any sailor of any rank who didn't love Nelson. Like, his ordinary sailors really, really liked him. And he was no flogger. He wasn't a big flogging. When he was a captain, he wasn't a big flogger. Did he flog people? Yes, he did. But then most good sailors agreed with that, because if you had somebody like a thief aboard, for example, you had to do that because you're living hugger-mugger together, 700 guys probably in a ship like Victory. And you have very little personal space. So the sailors detested someone who was a thief, for example, because you couldn't trust your shipmates in that case. And they were quite happy for people like that to be flogged.
Yep.
Because what else can you do with them on a ship? I mean, all right, you can put them in irons for a week maybe, but that's about it, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Nelson was a noted humanitarian officer. He was a humane officer, and as I say, his ordinary sailors, they loved him. He was very, very popular.
I think anyone like Nelson who just doesn't throw away lives that'd be so much better, wouldn't it? Like Napoleon, who'd have no problem. 10,000 dead. Oh well, I'll replace them.
And the other thing about Nelson, of course, Tharium, is that Nelson would always lead from the front.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is why he's killed at Trafalgar.
Yeah.
He's in his full dress uniform, pacing up and down on the quarterdeck of the Victory.
Yeah.
And there were officers who said to him, "Put on a plainer coat, sir," and stuff. And he said, "No. He would take more risks than any other sailor on his ship."
Yeah. It's like you can't. I mean, you got all these suicidal charges, but well, if the guy in charge is doing the order, is leading it, you have to follow.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Like when he boarded and captured the 2 Spanish ships at Cape St. Vincent, Nelson led the boarding action, and he wasn't a big bloke. He was quite a slight guy, but he was sword and pistol in hand, and he led it with his coxswain behind him, the guy who ran his ship's boat that took him ashore and stuff.
He did definitely want to die in battle, though. He'd have hated it if he died an old age in bed peacefully. That'd be miserable for him. Like, it's like the romantic dying in battle sort of thing, like a heroic death like that.
Yeah, was it like that Niall where a splinter hit his forehead and he thought that was the end?
Yeah.
It's like, I think if you another thing about Nelson is I said this before. The Japanese admiral who won the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, so 90 years after, 100 years after this battle.
100 years.
Yeah, 100 years. He said he believed that Togo Heihachiro, this Japanese admiral, he believed that he was a reincarnation of Lord Horatio Nelson after winning that stunning victory over the Russians. So that's kind of like, so in a way, I mean, I mean, some people would say, "Oh, Nelson has competition with Admiral Yi of Korea," which that's far beyond scope. But I would say, I'd say, look, I mean, perhaps it's just become an Englishman, but I'm going to say Lord Nelson's the best naval commander of history. Perhaps it's just become English, but I mean, what do you say about an admiral 100 years after your death? Boasting proudly that he is your reincarnation after winning his own serious battle.
And he was that Japanese admiral was a samurai dude as well, as all the senior Japanese officers were in those days. So yeah, he was a good guy to like you. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to find any professional sailor who has much bad to say about Nelson, to be honest with you. Another thing that Nelson once said was, aft the greater honour, forward the better man. And what he meant by that was the officers' quarters were aft in the ship, at the back of the ship, and forward was where the men were. So Nelson said, aft the greater honour, forward the better man. Again, you can see why Nelson was loved by his sailors.
Yeah, the only other quote I can think of now at this point about Nelson is he said, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm going off Master Commando on this one. Don't mind manoeuvres, just go straight at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did sometimes say that. On the other hand, he didn't always behave that way. I mean, if you look at the Battle of the Nile, for example, Nelson got some of his captains to go inshore of the French squadron, which was anchored, and the French fought. They were so close inshore that the Royal Navy couldn't get on that side of them. And of course, the Royal Navy, which had better captains and better officers and better seamen, were able to get inside them.
Yeah.
With guys swinging the lead. You guys will have heard the expression "swinging the lead," meaning you're not doing much. But in the Royal Navy, and where the saying comes from, it means you're standing in the forechains of your ship. You're literally chucking a lead weight out ahead of you that is marked with the depth on it. And then you'll sing out, 5 fathoms, 2 fathoms, whatever it might be. And that was swinging the lead. And English ships, British ships, I should say, were able to get inside the French and then double them. So you'd have an English ship on one side, then the French ship, then another English ship. And of course, the Nile was another of Nelson's annihilating battles, which is what he always aimed for.
Yeah, I mean, the French then, in that time you're talking about, they thought that was impossible. They thought that they just didn't think that was even possible, that someone could get on the inside of them like that. But then Nelson comes along and just does it.
Yeah, that's common French military trope for history. Well, they just go, well, we can't do that, therefore the enemy can't. And then
Key Buckley in the chat is pointing out that HMS Culloden ran aground, which it did, although she was pulled off it later on. But most of the ships that did that did not run aground. And of course, if you're going to do something like that, there's always going to be some risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you can't do that with no risk at all. But the fact that only one ship ran aground and she was floated off again later, Nelson was just he was a naval genius. He really was, because his object was always not just to beat the enemy. You have to understand that before Nelson, in the 18th century, the standard naval tactics were you formed a long line ahead, it was called, so you could use your broadsides, and then 2 fleets would sail along next to each other, pretty much hammering at each other. But Nelson knew that 1 or 2 ships here and there would fall victim, but you could never get a decisive victory that way. And Nelson always wanted a decisive victory, an annihilating victory.
Yeah, that's another thing as well. Like, you imagine with sailors, they get prizes, don't they, for taking over a ship as well. So that's probably one reason as well why Nelson was popular. Because
absolutely. I mean, important thing about the Royal Navy, and there were quite a lot of professional sailors who preferred serving in the Royal Navy to serving in the merchant service. And of course, Britain had a very, very big merchant navy because we're an island. But Britain and had an empire and were trading all over the place. But there were sailors who preferred serving in the Royal Navy because although the pay was possibly a little lower, your victuals, your supplies, 3 square meals a day, as they used to say, because they were served on square plates. Your victuals, the supplies, the food was better in the Royal Navy, believe it or not. I know they often go on about how bad the food was in the Royal Navy. To be honest, it probably wasn't, particularly if you were an average working class bloke. And there was also plenty of it, relatively speaking. And you also got, as Mitch correctly says, prize money. So any ship that you capture or your squadron captures, you get a proportion of that money. And the higher rank you are, the more money you get.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
there were sailors in the Royal Navy in the 18th and 19th century who became relatively rich. This is one reason why there are so many pubs around England, or at least they used to be before they started closing them all, that were named after captains and admirals and stuff. It was usually one of their sailors would open the pub and call it that.
The pub at the end of my road was called the Nelson, and where I grew up, and it was I did look back. It was opened like within a year of the Battle of Trafalgar. So
possibly by a former sailor, who knows? A lot of them were.
yeah.
But there were things that made the Royal Navy worth serving in, and also, of course, you could get promotion in the Royal
Yeah.
Navy. I mean, even
Very-
if you weren't commissioned, you could certainly go up the ranks to petty officer and so on.
very merit based, rather than just
Yes,
heritage. Yeah.
it had to be, because it was such a challenging environment, particularly in a sailing navy. I mean, the sea is still a pretty challenging environment to wage war in 2025.
Yeah.
It was a lot more so in 1805, when you only had sails to power you.
Yeah, I know, like, because especially if it's the Atlantic, like, you know, Trafalgar being the Atlantic. I know, like, after the battle, there was a tough Atlantic storm, and that's just part of the course. I know the North Sea, I've seen videos of like these freighter ships sailing the North Sea, and it's like, you just have a thing, you have to have balls of steel as a sailor to be on a freighter ship, like sailing on one of those, because you know, someone who's not so brave might think, okay, what's stopping the ship from tinking over? But yeah, but you can imagine as well, as you sail, you know, you'd have to.
Keith Buckley, he says that's why the SBS are better than the SAS. I'm not going to get involved in that argument, but I am never going to say anything bad about the Royals. So there you go. That's the Royal Marines. But the SBS are the Special Forces bit of. But anyway,
I don't know if we want to get into like, I know, like, sort of a build up to the battle,
Well, I wanted to just talk briefly about Nelson himself. Nelson was a fairly middle class dude. His father was a vicar in Norfolk, but he did have naval relatives. I think it was Suckling. Captain Suckling was his uncle or something like that, and he took him to sea initially. But the Royal Navy was mostly a middle class service. There were a few aristocrats in it, like, for example, the Scottish Earl of Dundonald, Cochrane. But it was mostly a middle class service, really, in terms of the officers. And you know, Nelson had this pretty classic middle class background. His dad was a vicar, basically. Morris Suckling Mitch is telling me, yes, absolutely correct. So so that was how Nelson got to sea, because that's normally how midshipmen would get a berth. That it would be a relative or a friend who was in the Navy and would agree to take it. That's how you did it.
Yeah, I didn't know this. I didn't know this until literally 5 minutes ago. But Lord Nelson, apparently, he suffered seasickness, which
initially he did.
Yeah, I mean, because I imagine, like, because I said Royal Navy, we largely recruit within like 15 miles of the coast, which is most of Britain, basically. I would have thought, okay, I would have thought that by, let's say, because age of 12 is usually when you're recruited, by which time you probably have been on a boat before in the past. I would have thought,
depending on the size and the beam and all sorts of other things, the boat will move differently. So even if you're a relatively experienced sailor on one sort of vessel, if you then go on another, it's perfectly possible to get seasick still. Now, I'm lucky, I don't get seasick, but I have seen people who literally wanted to die because of seasickness. You know, you could have chucked them overboard and they would have said thank you almost. You know. But yeah, I mean that stuff's fine. Mitch, you were saying we should before we do though, guys, a little bit of housekeeping. If you want to support the channel, you can do so via Entropy, which is pinned at the top of the chat, and you can also ask super chat questions there, which we will all of us will answer towards the end of the stream. And I do normally remember to do it. So. Yeah, so if you want to do that, and also, guys, please, if you haven't already done so, hit the like button. It really does help the channel quite a lot. So hit that thumbs up button as well. Mitch, you were saying we should move on to the campaign, and I think you're probably right because we're at an hour. So let's move on to the Trafalgar campaign.
Yeah, so 1803. We're back at war with the French after like quite a bit of a peace, and Napoleon he's eyeing up an invasion of Great Britain because while he can deal with the likes of Austria, Russia, Prussia, and so on, he can't he's wanting to get rid of us because we're just that massive pain in the arse in his view. So, yeah, so
I mean, we keep funding all these wars against him.
Yeah,
and also giving. Britain not only was giving subsidies like cash grants basically to people like Austria, Russia, and Prussia. We were also providing them with uniforms, muskets, cannon, ammunition, boots, and none of this was then leased. By the way, this was all just given away.
Yeah. So you have like in 1803, Napoleon appoints this guy called Latouche-Treville as vice admiral, I believe, which would be probably most like senior rank that Villeneuve would later have, to be commanding the French naval forces to coordinate an invasion of Great Britain. The whole plan is you'll have Napoleon at Boulogne along the Channel coastline, so it'd be like around here. The thing was, basically, you got one fleet in Brest, which is as strong as 23 ships of the line. Here in Rochefort, there was 5 ships of the line, and then Toulon, which would be around here, has around 11 ships of the line, 10 ships of the line, as well as 10 frigates. But the problem is there's a massive distance between them. But there's so many long, convoluted plans that are really complicated, and Latouche-Treville, he's just not able to make a success of it, really. Fast forward, end of 1804, Treville dies, and he's replaced by Villeneuve. And Villeneuve, he's the kind of guy where he's over-promoted far beyond his capability, but he accepts it because pretty much there's no one else, really. And the thing about Villeneuve is he just does things as he's told. He doesn't have any initiative. He'll just do exactly as is ordered. So when he's told by Napoleon, look, you've got to get all the navy into the Channel to escort my navy onto Great Britain, because Napoleon was having something like 110,000 troops gathered in Boulogne for the express purpose of invading Great Britain, and as well as having like 432 artillery pieces and 7,000 horses, all the rest of it. You then have Villeneuve.
Mitch, just to interrupt you 1 second, this was about the time when Sir John Jervis, Admiral St. Vincent, stood up in Parliament and said, "I do not say, sirs, that the French cannot come. I merely say they cannot come by sea," because the Royal Navy was never going to let them get across the Channel. Sorry, Mitch, carry on, mate.
Yeah. So you have the French are still having this massive problem of, well, they can't get concentration of force. As I said, you've got the most nimble fleet is Rochefort with 5 ships of the line, well, it's pretty easy for 5 ships to slip bypass. It's a lot harder, however, for Brest, which is blockaded by Admiral Cornwallis, for their 23 ships of the line to escape. I mean, you also got a factor for Toulon. Like now, Rear Admiral Nelson is around Corsica or Sardinia kind of way, eyeing up Toulon to keep him in check. However, Villeneuve is able to give him a slip by journeying out of the Mediterranean through the Straits of Gibraltar, while Nelson mistakenly thinks that they're headed for Egypt. It's only when Nelson gets to Alexandria that he realizes his mistake. So then he's having to double back, get into the Caribbean, where Villeneuve meets up with like a handful of French ships in the Caribbean. And by the time Nelson gets there, he misses them by like a week. And by this time, Nelson, he's starting to get despondent, thinking he's never going to be able to catch up to the French. So he decides to try and get back to the Mediterranean to see if the French fleet will show up there. But then he sends this messenger. I think it's a sloop. I believe it's like a fast messenger kind of ship called HMS Courier to convey his message to London. Perchance, almost by good fortune, HMS Cuvier spots Villeneuve's fleet in the middle Atlantic, and Nelson finds out they're going northeast towards the Channel rather than going to the Mediterranean. So Nelson changes tack and he speeds ahead towards the Mediterranean, towards the northern Spanish coast. Around this time, around like the
southern Spanish coast.
Yeah, because Villeneuve was originally headed towards here, but the thing was, Admiral Calder, he intercepts the French-Spanish.
Calder's action, it's called, yes.
Yeah, around Cape Finisterre, which is here. The Spanish and French, I believe, 2 ships of the French-Spanish fleet are taken, and Admiral Calder repels them. However, later on, he's taken back to London for court-martial because they found his action unsatisfactory, because it turns out he left an opening where most of that Spanish-French fleet at Cape Finisterre, they were mostly intact, and they could have united with Villeneuve around here and could have advanced to go against Cornwallis. However, around here,
Mitch Calder would have been very nervous for that court-martial, by the way, because of course it wasn't so many years before that Admiral Byng had been executed on the quarterdeck of his own flagship for not engaging the enemy hard enough. So yes, Calder would have been pretty nervous about that. The Royal Navy, the British, were pretty ruthless with Royal Navy officers who were not aggressive enough.
Some real standards there, isn't it? You weren't aggressive enough, so we're going to kill you.
Yeah, the Royal Marines shot him on the quarterdeck of his own flagship. So yeah, Calder would not have been a happy man going back to England for that court-martial.
Yeah, Mitch, I've got a interactive map you might like, because it shows the positions day by day of the fleet. I'll link it in the private chat, and you can sort of move it by day. See, I don't know. See if we think of that. So if you zoom out a bit, there Nelson's fleet is in red there, that red square, and then Villeneuve's is up a bit. So you're in July 1805. He's still in the Mediterranean. Out a bit more. There you go. The green square in the the Atlantic. You zoom out. Up a bit. See him there, left of France.
Just trying I was watching Trafalgar this earlier, and but yeah, I think it's I know like Villeneuve, he heard that Nelson was around here, and he got spooked because the thing was he heard of Calder's action, and he thought he was going to get trapped, basically. So he just saw fit to just flee to Cadiz in the south, and so he's scared that he's going to get trapped. But then what happens at Cadiz is he gets blockaded anyway for like the next 8 weeks.
Mhm.
And then it's then he sallies out to try and get into the Mediterranean. But then halfway through his journey, he hears that Nelson's chasing him, so he decides, okay, he's gonna ship a bed again, and he's gonna try and go back to Cadiz. But that leads to his formation just getting all strung out, and so you have like this sort of weird crescent shape of a 5 mile.
Yeah, they're in a long straggling crescent with big gaps between some of the ships, and certainly not ship shape and Royal Navy fashion, where every ship would be 2 cables behind its neighbor. The French and Spanish, as I said earlier, because they didn't get to sea very often, because the Royal Navy dominated the seas around their ports, they just weren't such good sailors. The officers and the crew just weren't as good, and they couldn't maintain a close line that would be difficult to break, for example. Ataman, you haven't said anything for a while. Is there anything you wanted to talk about?
I'm a bloody boomer with this, man. Sorry.
No, I'm good.
No problem. Yeah, if you go back a bit more, you see that you got the green Villeneuve's Navy, and then you can go back and you can see how they're moving, like you were talking about Nelson chasing him and stuff.
Villeneuve was pretty indecisive. I mean, as you guys were saying, he wanted to get back into the Med, but then he changed his mind because Nelson was around. And that just made his fleet's position even worse. Although it's worth pointing out that Villeneuve's fleet was actually bigger than Nelson's. Villeneuve had 33 ships of the line, plus smaller vessels like frigates, whereas Nelson only had 27 ships of the line, plus a few smaller ships.
I wanted to say about the firepower in fleets at this time it's so immense for the time. Because Battle of Trafalgar had about 5,000 cannons. Battle of Waterloo was only about 500 in total.
If you look at the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo, which was probably the most artillery he had in any of his battles, HMS Victory had a heavier weight of a firepower than all of Wellington's artillery at Waterloo put together on one ship.
I was watching Epic History's video about it. So the Franco-Spanish fleet had something like 2,600 guns. We had just over 2,100. So we were outgunned like by 500 guns. We had 500 more guns than we did. Plus, also we were quite outnumbered as well. So when you look up casualties after the battle, it's just kind of massively lopsided.
Yeah, we'll go through those towards the end of the stream, Mitch. But yeah, it's seamanship and also gunnery. Like Royal Navy captains, good Royal Navy captains, practice their crews at gunnery with real shot when they could, when they had enough powder to do so. And sometimes they'd capture that from the enemy, by the way. The good Royal Navy captains practiced their crews at gunnery, and by and large, the British crews were much faster gunners. They would fire more shots more quickly than the French and Spanish.
Yeah, I know. Like one thing, so on the 21st of October, that you have, of course, the battle. It was something like 11. Yeah, it's like you have something like 11:45. That's when Nelson starts. That's when he gets his 2 columns hold on. I don't know if that's good enough quality, or I should go to the. I don't know if.
Yes.
I don't know if it's readable. I might go to the next image, but yeah. So basically, this is where you have 2 columns. It's around like 11:45 that Nelson and Collingwood they start really tearing apart that's when they might make their move, and it's only at 12:30 that they're able to start into contact. But it's only the last.
There was very light winds that day, so the British were advancing on the Franco-Spanish line quite slowly, and of course the risk of Nelson's tactic here is that while the Royal Navy fleet is approaching the Franco-Spanish line that outnumbers them, they are subject to the guns of every Franco-Spanish ship in range, whereas the only British ships that can reply are the ships at the front with their bow chasers, which is like a couple of guns at most. So you've got hundreds of enemy guns that can fire at you while you're doing this. So what Nelson is doing here is relying on the fact that the British seamanship is better, that the Franco-Spanish gunnery won't be very good, and that his men are well disciplined and brave enough to do this, which of course they are.
Yeah, and it's if you want to get a picture of how bad Nelson is. So Nelson, he's going along here to his port side. He's got Santos Trinidad with 130 guns barreled at him. Well, you got to divide that by half, so that's like 6. So you got a factor of what, 65 guns he's got to deal with on his port side. Then he's coming across Bucentaur, which Nelson, I mean, it's a bit of luck in a way that he guesses correctly that Bucentaur is the French flagship. But yeah, he's got to deal with 65 guns from Santos Trinidad barreling down on him as he gets to here. And then Bucentaur with on his starboard side.
Mitch, don't forget, you can tell from the flags that are being flown what ships have admirals on and this kind of stuff.
I mean, Epic History was saying about something about how Nelson initially found it hard to profile which ship had the admiral because of similar looking pennants. Or
well, there were several. There were quite a few admirals in the Franco-Spanish fleet, for one thing. But also, it would make sense that your admiral is going to be somewhere in the middle of your squadron. But you can tell which ships have admirals on because they fly different flags.
Yeah. So, for example, for example, this is you got so around 12:30, Victory. I mean, Royal Sovereign was the first one to really break up the Franco-Spanish column, but Victory gets really enmeshed, and I believe it's like 1:45 where Victory delivers her first broadside towards Bucentaur and kills off and wipes out like 50% of Bucentaur's crew with the first broadside because it was double shotted.
Key Buckley in the chat is pointing out that Nelson ordered the guns to be double shotted, which you could do at close range. You just reduce the charge that you put in the cannon. And of course, they're firing mainly solid iron cannonballs. They didn't explode, they're just solid iron balls. And at very close range, you can fire grape shot, which is basically like a keg of musket ball type things. So it turns the cannon into a gigantic shotgun, in effect. And as Mitch said, HMS Victory's first broadside pretty much wrecked one of the French ships.
Yeah, not just that, it's a French flagship as well, so it's half a crew just wiped out in an instant. Yeah, you have just these 2 columns just like tear up. it's kind of like defeating detail, but with sea, I suppose. Yeah, what then happens over the next few hours. You have a vanguard here, like these Neptuno, Scipion, Intrepid, basically these 5 friendships. They have a vanguard. They have to turn around, and it takes them like an hour to do so. In the meantime, you've got HMS Africa, who is not part of a
Sails down from up here.
Yeah, and just exchanged broadsides with this friendship. And then later on, Africa decided to trade broadsides with Santissima Trinidad later on, which is so you got the fact that Africa is what 3rd rate, I believe, like 64 guns.
Africa was a 3rd-rate 64 gunner, and she's fighting the largest warship in the world, the Santissima Trinidad, with 130 guns, a 4-decker. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Just to go for a Woodpit's comment. Redoutable, when Victory was tearing into to the logs of Bucentaur and Santissima Trinidad, Redoutable tried to get close to Victory to deliver some grape shot. Not to do grape shot. To do a boarding
small arms.
Yeah. It was Temeraire that comes later on and grape shots the entirety of a boarding crew on Redoutable. So,
and people will have seen what's his name? I can't remember the guy's name now. The guy who did the famous painting, The Fighting Temeraire, English painter. What's his name, guys? Someone remind me.
J.M.W. Turner.
Turner's The Fighting Temeraire is a very famous painting, and she's being towed up the Thames by a steam tug to be broken up. So it's a kind of sad painting in a way. But that's the same Temeraire that supported HMS Victory at Trafalgar.
Yeah, and this is probably the one thing that'll be confusing. So you got HMS Achilles or Achille here, whereas you got the French Achille here. So that's one thing to bear in mind is, so we say Achilles or Achille, whereas the French will say Achille. So that's a funny thing. I know the French ship Achille actually explodes later on in the battle, like the only ship to get destroyed, whereas the others largely get taken or flee the battle or are damaged and so
on. I'm conscious that Alman hasn't said anything for a while. Adam, did you have anything you wanted to put in at this point?
No, I'm just listening to the explanation of the battle lines and the rest of it.
No, that's fine. I just was conscious you hadn't said anything for a bit. Yeah, but as I say, one of the things that Nelson.
Oh.
And you can kind of see it from this plan that
you muted yourself there. We missed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. One of the things that Nelson is aiming for, and you can kind of see it from this plan that Mitch has put up, is he wants to break up the Franco-Spanish fleet into separate parts. It's going to be broken up into 3 separate bits by the 2 British columns, and then he wants to fight a pell-mell battle where the French and Spanish are all broken up and can't support each other, and the much faster British gunnery and better British seamanship will really tell. And as I say, the risk was, had the Franco-Spanish guys been better gunners, they would have battered to death the first 2 or 3 British ships on both columns. But they didn't, because they weren't, and he knew that.
Yeah, I know in Belle Isle, I believe she got demasted in the midst of a battle.
A lot of ships got demasted during the battle, Mitch, but the point was they didn't do it before the British columns had penetrated the Franco-Spanish line.
Yeah, because there was, I think on our side there were only a total of 5 ships that were majorly damaged in the course of a battle.
Oh much. Yeah. I mean, look, towards the end of the stream, in about half an hour, we will talk about casualties and that sort of stuff. But yeah, basically Nelson's gamble, and it was an educated gamble. Nelson knew that the if the Franco-Spanish line had been Royal Navy ships, you couldn't have done what Nelson did, because they would have just battered the face in of the first few ships. So you probably wouldn't have even penetrated their line. But also, if that had been a Royal Navy line, it wouldn't have been that long, lazy arc. It would have been a straight line of ships very close together, because of better Royal Navy seamanship. But Nelson knew that the Franco-Spanish couldn't do that. And he also knew that their gunnery standards were much lower. So it was a calculated gamble.
Didn't some of the Spanish ships have the wrong size cannonballs or something?
I'm not sure about that, to be quite honest with you. I'm not. I really don't know. The Spanish Navy was always extremely brave, but they were sometimes a bit late at doing things. You know,
that is the Spanish way.
Possibly. But yeah, I think that's a very instructive plan that Mitch has put up there, because it shows what Nelson's trying to do. And he's not after winning the battle or simply winning the battle. What Nelson wants to do is annihilate the enemy. He wants to destroy their fleet, basically, not just take 2 or 3 ships.
Yeah, I know. What was it? I know. Yeah. Because it's something like you got to factor. So this is like 34 ships against 27 on our side, and you factor like how outgunned and outnumbered we were to have scored such a decisive victory, especially when you factor as well like the French had first. I suppose you say I don't know, first blood or first shot. I suppose you would say.
The Franco-Spanish, Mitch, were basically able to fire at the Royal Navy for almost an hour before, and the Royal Navy could reply with like 4 guns, maybe, for almost an hour. Because, as I say, there wasn't much wind, and so the Royal Navy fleet was approaching them quite slowly. Less than walking pace, probably.
Yeah, I know. Like one thing about the French fleet, and this was a problem leading up to the battle, let alone during it, was so Villeneuve. I say he kept losing his nerve because he had PTSD pretty much from the Nile with Nelson. So it was a matter of plenty of his own captains just resented him. For example, the captains of Redoutable, Alger-Silla, and what was the other one? I think I forget the first, but basically, you had some of the captains who, while they were in port, they were training their men to how to board ships and use. Well, they couldn't even be trained how to use chain shot because, as they were blocked up in port for 8 weeks. So all they could do was learn how to board. But as I said, as what happened with Temeraire grape shot in Redoutable's boarding crew, I say every time the French tried to get into position to board one of the British ships, one of our ships would come in as reinforcement to just rake any sort of attempt at French boarding. It was a hellish scenario for the French because their gunnery wasn't good. Because as I said, they spent at least the past few months they just hadn't been really training their crews all that much in terms of gunnery. The rate of fire on the part of the Royal Navy was far superior. The Spanish, there was a point where I think Intrepid, as this French vanguard get into play, they're seeing both columns just fully enmeshed, and they're just thinking, nope, we're not going to get into this. We're going to give a heck of a dodge. Even to the point where some of the Spanish crews, I think of Santa Ana, her crew who surrendered in the midst of a battle, they offered to fire on Intrepid later on in the battle. They were just so disgusted with the French just running away.
Yeah, that's true, Mitch. I've also read about that story. That they were some of the guys who got cut off ahead of the Franco-Spanish fleet did turn and try and come back. But by the time they got back, the Royal Navy ships had already defeated the guys they were fighting, so it did them no good.
Yeah, and it's like, for example, you have Bucentaur, which, when they struck their colours later on in the day, Villeneuve is one of the prisoners, and you have just the vast majority of these. The Vanguard are largely able to get away, just by being raped, but they're able to get away, especially on Trapede, which they're able to get back to port. Well, actually, no, I didn't get back to port on second thought. No, it was that'll be more for the aftermath. But the French Navy, some are able to escape of this mess, but they get into another mess later on, like 2 weeks after the battle in north of Spain. But yeah, it's just a complete annihilation. I'm trying to think there was. Yeah, so you factor, for example, I said 34 ships altogether versus 27 of ours.
I think it was 30. I think it was 33, Mitch, to be honest. But yeah, line of battleships. It was 33, I think.
Oh yeah, so yeah, it was 33. I miscounted for a second.
There were five. There were also 5 French frigates and some corvettes, but there were 33 minor battleships, and a frigate would basically not get involved in a battleship action, because if they did, they'd be destroyed by one broadside by a line of battleship. Frigates couldn't fight line of battleships; they just weren't strongly enough built, and their guns were much lighter.
Yeah, because the thing was, this was what Nelson had with him at the Nile. I mean, not at the Nile, at Trafalgar. I keep misspeaking. Because the thing was, he originally had something like 34 ships, if I remember correctly. But the thing was, HMS Prince of Wales, under Calder, they had to go back to England. And I think it was like 5 or 6 had to be dispatched to Gibraltar for rest and refit. So Nelson was just left with 27.
Yeah, which was enough. In the end, it was enough. I mean, as I say, 33 Franco-Spanish ships, 27 Royal Navy British ships, and the French lost 17 ships of the line captured and another one destroyed. So 18 of their ships were gone, and many of the rest of them were so badly damaged that they wouldn't be able to go to sea for months.
Yeah, and another thing was 2 weeks after the battle, there was another naval battle north of Spain. I can't remember who was commanding our side, but basically there were a handful of French ships that were all just taken back to Britain. So in the space of like 2 weeks, you just have the French side of things just got completely obliterated, and Villeneuve was himself taken prisoner. It was something like 5,000 dead on the Franco-Spanish side. While
I'll give you the figures, guys. The Royal Navy lost 450 killed and just over 1,200 wounded. The Franco-Spanish guys lost almost 4,500 killed and over 2,500 wounded, plus another 8,000 guys captured. So it was an annihilating battle, which is what Nelson had aimed for, of course.
Yeah, I find it one thing worth noticing how within 6 months of the battle, all 3 leaders in that battle, so Nelson, Villeneuve, and Gravina, all 3 of them were dead within 6 months of a battle. Like, it was like Nelson.
Sorry, Mitch, you finished what you were saying.
Yeah, like Nelson, of course, famously gets, because the thing was he was on the top deck, and he got sniped by a guy on Murdo Talbot's mizzen in the midst of the battle. Villeneuve dies 6 months later. Some people reckon suicide, others reckon he was assassinated. That's debatable. And then you've got Gravina, who's mortally wounded he was mortally wounded at Trafalgar, and he gets to the Spanish court where he says, okay, he gives them a bad news and says, okay, may we mourn Lord Nelson's death. And he dies like 6 months after the battle, I believe.
I think it's very likely that Villeneuve was assassinated probably on Napoleon's orders, because Napoleon was that sort of shitbag, basically. He was into that sort of thing, big time. He was a nasty person, Napoleon. Nelson, of course, as I said earlier in the stream, some of his officers begged him to put on a plainer coat without all these decorations and medals on it, and he wouldn't. He said, no, I'm the commander-in-chief, and I'm going to be dressed as the commander-in-chief. And of course, some shipbag in the French ship sniped him from the mizzen mast, which is the rearmost mast on the ship, for anyone who doesn't know. And I hope that guy died. I really do. Yeah. And but Nelson Nelson was shot through the spine, and he knew he was dead. He said as much when they carried him down below to the orlop deck where the surgeon was doing stuff, and he basically drowned in his own blood. His own blood was filling his lungs up. Not a nice death. He was trying to get the people around him to fan him to give him enough air because he couldn't breathe because he's drowning in his own blood. Not pleasant at all. But he did live long enough to know that the Royal Navy had won a great victory. So he at least went to his maker with that knowledge.
Yeah, I know. One thing he ordered straight away was he ordered his face be covered because he didn't want his men to see that he'd been shot or wounded. Because if that was known by the crew, then it would have probably sunk their spirits at a critical level. So he had his face covered, and then in the lower decks, he was saying, because people say that people have variation interpretations of to what he said. Because people reckon he said "kiss me hardy," whereas other people say he said "kismet," which apparently kismet is a Turkish word for fate or death or something like that.
It could have been either of those things, to be honest. I mean, Nelson was a 18th century man. He certainly wasn't gay. You can look up Emma Hamilton and all this stuff if you want to. Yeah, he may have said "kiss me hardy" just because he was an 18th century man and being poetic, if you know what I mean. I certainly wouldn't hold that against him at all. And as I say, he certainly wasn't gay. You can look up his infamous affair with the actress Emma Hamilton.
The National Maritime Museum, that's got the coat he was wearing at the battle. I think that is a real national relic. That got that.
That's a Greenwich, isn't it?
Yeah.
Barrow. Yeah. And of course, if you haven't been aboard, do go and visit HMS Victory, oldest commissioned warship in the world, and really, really worth a visit. They're doing an enormous rebuild of her at the moment, or restoration, I guess, which is taking enormous amounts of time. But I presume eventually she'll get a bloody mast back, which will be kind of nice. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest, even though I live in the south of England, I haven't actually ever been to see it.
Oh, you really should, Adam.
Yeah.
And also, of course, if you go to Portsmouth, while you're there, you've also got to go to HMS Warrior, the world's first iron battleship as well.
Yeah.
Really, really worth a visit. I mean, you can have a great day doing that. There's also a submarine, a Royal Navy submarine you can go on board. There's M8, which is a World War I monitor, which is a ship for bombarding the land, that you can also go see. And of course, the Royal Naval Museum is brilliant as well at Portsmouth. Yeah. So yeah, Portsmouth is a place I would absolutely recommend people to go. Really great. And unlike Aldershot, it's not a shithole. Aldershot's the home of the British Army, for anyone who doesn't know. But it's a shithole. Don't go there. Anyway, always was as well. But yeah, Key Buckley is saying he was brought back to Portsmouth in a barrel of rum. He was indeed, yes. Which is why sometimes sailors used to call rum Nelson's blood, because his body was brought back to Portsmouth in a barrel of rum. Nelson, of course, is buried in St Paul's Cathedral next to the Duke of Wellington, quite appropriately, I think.
Yeah, I think it's like he was the first guy to be given a state funeral in that way. He was since John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough.
Yeah, because he was just England's hero. I remember about 2000, I think it was, Mitch, the BBC did this huge poll for the best or most famous or what, I can't remember what it was, the greatest Britain, I think it was, right? And I voted for Nelson.
Yeah.
But things were so fucked up back then. That it looked like Lady Diana was going to win. That's how it did. I mean, right. Okay, so the royal whore was going to win. Okay, good. But yeah. But yeah, so and everyone ended up voting for Churchill because that was the only way to stop Lady Diana winning. But I was going to vote for Nelson, to be honest, as the greatest Briton of all time. Because I think he probably was, to be honest. He certainly deserves his place on the top of that enormous column in Trafalgar Square.
Mm-hmm. Which they unfortunately continue to sully with horrible modern art installations.
Oh, yeah, no. I hate it, mate. I just hate it. But I think he was. I think he was England and Britain's greatest hero in many respects. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Duke of Wellington. Obviously, look at my avatar. But Nelson, I think, is because he was a sailor and Britain should be a sea power. Yeah, Nelson.
Yeah, I'm just imagining if I had like a sort of our own version of it, Argonath. I wonder if you reckon Lord Nelson and Duke of Wellington would be those two guys.
Sure. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah,
I can't think of anyone better, and the only one who comes close to them is John Churchill, the original Duke of Marlborough.
I'm very partial to William the Marshal.
Yeah, he was a great. Listen, if you're going to go that far back, then of course Alfred the Great. I mean, you can't really go past the only
British Empire characters.
English monarch to be called great, Alfred the Great for sure. You know.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at great generals like Lord Roberts, for example, and Lord Wolseley, like they would be supporters of people like Nelson and Wellington. They wouldn't be equal to them.
No.
Or Colin Campbell, Lord Clyde, another one, would be a great man by anyone's standards, but not up there with Nelson or Wellington. And I think Nelson is probably, someone saying in the chat, Edward Black Prince. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If you're going to go back far enough in time, Henry V is another one, you know. Yeah. Richard the Lionheart, maybe, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'll be a right competition.
This is the thing. This is the thing about Britain. Is there's so many great men. I mean, Captain Cook, you know.
Yeah.
There's just so many great men. We have no shortage of them.
Yeah. One thing I find funny about the battle was that you have a ship which had blown up, but their casualties are like, I don't know, just over 60. Meanwhile, Redoutable, which doesn't blow up, but it's taken, and so there's 80% crew casualties for the battle. I think that HMS Victory suffered like 20% casualties, of which, of course, Nelson was one of them.
Mostly wounded, of course, rather than killed. But yeah.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah, that's one thing. It's kind of obligatory to always have to mention this, but casualty doesn't always mean dead. Everyone.
No, it's usually at least 3 to 1 wounded to death.
You do sometimes see when people are trying to sort of misrepresent a battle, they'll say like the killed, the actual dead on one side, and then the casualties on another. And it's make it look like
Yeah, in terms of casualties, if you see casualties and it doesn't say dead, you can basically work on the basis that you'll have 3 wounded for every dead guy. So, and some of those wounded guys will die, particularly back in 1805 when, medicine was less advanced than it is. But yeah, there's another great little story from Trafalgar. A British boat's crew rescued a French girl from the sea. And there's a famous painting of this, which I have put up, but I can't put it up on YouTube. She lost all her clothes because the ship caught fire. And she had been, and the British boat's crew very happily rescued her so she didn't drown. Because they picked up this nude French girl, and she was quite young and pretty as well. And they picked her up from the middle of the ocean. And I dare say they were probably the happiest boat crew in the whole of Nelson's fleet. So there you go.
Another one funny thing I read once was that song Spanish Ladies, where apparently it was something like apparently the Kingdom of Spain and Moses tried to ban the song because basically the thing was every time English sailors would go to a port, they sleep with all the Spanish women because, of course, British sailors were better paid than Spanish soldiers.
Well, and also, of course, all sailors have a girl in every port, reportedly, anyway. So there's a nice toast in Master and Commander, which is indeed a traditional Royal Navy toast, where the toast is to wives and sweethearts. And then someone will say, may they never meet.
Yeah.
Was
Aubrey Allen is saying not all sailors, I'm sure, but that's only because her dad was a sailor and she wants to think he was a good man. And I'm sure he was, Aubrey Allen. I'm sure your dad was as pure as the driven snow. But anyway.
Was the fact that the French had some woman in their fleet the real reason they lost?
No, I don't think it was. And I think this chick was just getting a lift. Royal Navy skippers would do this. Like if an officer was on a foreign station and he wanted his wife to come out and see him or something, another skipper who was his friend would give her a lift.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the backstory of that French woman must be, though, because
I think she was a fiance or something like that, or maybe a sister. I can't remember now. She was either a fiance or a sister, and she was getting a lift somewhere, apparently.
Yeah, probably from the Caribbean, if I had to guess, because I know because that was the thing, like fleet before they arrived to Spain. They were going from Caribbean, and yeah, you probably something like that, yeah.
But it was a great Royal Navy victory, and what it did was it gave Britain command of the world's oceans for the next 120 years, pretty much. And it was only given away not as a result of a war, because Britain won the First World War and thoroughly won the First World War at sea. The German high seas fleet surrendered to the Royal Navy and then scuttled itself.
The fact that they viewed Jutland as a loss for Britain, I mean, that is a bit silly.
Given
the standard.
The Germans fled, the Germans fled and were very lucky to get back to port.
Yeah, never put out to sea again for the rest of the war. But it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough, so it's a loss.
Well, not just that. When German sailors were told to go out to sea again, they literally went and started a revolution.
Yeah, in 1918, the German officers decided they were going to do a suicide run against the Royal Navy, which by 1918 was even more gigantic and powerful than it had been in 1916. And it would have been absolutely a suicide run. And the German sailors just said, no, we're not doing this, guys. Not a chance. And as Mitch said, they started a revolution. They did. But the British still commanded the world's oceans in 1919, but the British politicians gave it away in 1922 when we signed the Washington Naval Treaty and agreed to scrap scores of Royal Navy battleships in order to be the same size as the Americans, which was ridiculous. We didn't have to do it and was an enormous error. But there we go.
Yeah, and you also got to factor like it scrapped the Anglo-Japanese alliance at a time when we could have done with it, but also it's like okay, so for example, Battle Trafalgar, as I said to you before, because the thing was, while Japan was modernizing, there was a case where some French naval guys they were going to Japan saying, perhaps you can hire us to teach your navy, and the Imperial Japanese Navy were like, no, we want the Brits to do it, and they just binned off the French because they were studying Trafalgar and before, well, what's the point of learning off the French? They can't. It's the same with
learn from the best, Mitch. Learn from the best.
Yeah. So, but it's like as I said earlier, you have that famous Japanese admiral, Bada Tsushima, who said he was the reincarnation of Lord Nelson 100 years after Trafalgar. So yeah, it's just one of the things where I know all over South America, for example, their navies hired British experts to train them up their crews afterwards. Like that was just a position where Pax Britannica meant that everyone just went to us if they wanted to learn how to have a navy, whether it be the Japanese, Chileans, Brazilians, even the Argentines, or let's say who else? I don't know, Thailand, and other.
Look, I would argue that as late as 1982, when the Falklands War happened, because the Argentinians invaded the Falklands, and the Royal Navy sent a great task force down south to retake it. Now, of course, the Royal Marines and the Army were involved in the land operations, but you couldn't have even done those until the Royal Navy got down there and chased the Argentine Navy away from the waters and also defeated the Argentine Air Force. And I would argue even as late as 1982, Royal Navy was still an extremely competent and very good Navy and quite large. People don't realize that during the Falklands War, the Royal Navy had 70 destroyers and frigates. We've got like 12 now, but it was 70 at the time of the Falklands War. And we also had 12 nuclear hunter-killer submarines plus conventional submarines. These days, the Royal Navy has 6 nuclear submarines and no conventional submarines at all. We also don't have any amphibious ships now because we've just sold the last couple we had to Brazil.
Yeah. So if you could take the Royal Navy back to either the 60s or the 80s, which one would you take?
Oh, 60s for sure, because it was even more powerful in the 60s. In the 60s, we had 5 aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
And probably 100 frigates and destroyers and a few cruisers.
Yeah,
so,
I don't know if
can we maintain that with our current economy? Do you think the 60s level? I imagine
our economy is richer than it was in the 60s, but
I mean, at this current time, it's a bit of a paper.
For sure,
but,
for sure, Adam, for sure.
It could be made good within this time frame.
It could, but you've also got to remember that we were spending far less money in the 60s on subsidizing immigrants of one sort or another. We were spending far less money on the National Health Service than we do today, much of which is wasted, by the way, on things like the National Health Service's diverse and woke art department, Why the fucking National Health Service as
You
an
wouldn't
army
get quite as many young guys signing up at their local pub or tavern to go off and fight in battles like the Battle of Trafalgar if they were presiding under the tax system that sees them battery farm,
Yep.
a million Bomalians a year.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and also even in the 1982, one of the reasons young guys used to go and join the Royal Navy is you had a very good chance of your ship spending a year in the Indian Ocean or in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, which is, when you're a young man, that's great. It's an adventure, If all you're going to do is sail around the North Sea and the Baltic and the English Channel, that's a pretty boring thing,
Do you not
I mean,
think
it's
so
all
that
it's
some
all
of
right
the
if you're on a sailboat and you're having fun, but like as a warship, it's not exactly exotic. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Or even, you might spend a year in the Mediterranean again and visit loads of interesting places like Rome and Athens and that sort of stuff.
Do you not think though that because people can just go on holiday to those places anyway, that takes away some of that draw?
No, because if you're in the military and you go and do that, I'll give you an army example, right? When I joined the army, the guys who everyone liked in my battalion were the guys who'd been in Hong Kong, and my battalion was in Hong Kong for like 2 years. Well, how do you spend 2 years in Hong Kong on a holiday, mate? You can't, know. And you get leave every week pretty much, unless you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, I mean you were saying earlier about our Navy training foreign powers back in the day. I mean the RAF to some extent still does this, but it's sort of unofficial. It's fast jet pilots who've been shunned due to various things go off to China.
There is official stuff too.
Yeah. No, but the British military still train foreign powers. Yeah. Absolutely, we do. That's certainly true. The Army does, the Navy does, the RAF does.
It does seem more and more nowadays to be like the Marvel contingent. It's like whatever the gay thinks is the current sort of stepchild of the day. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But all I'm trying to say here is that Britain's Royal Navy heritage was still alive and well as late as 1982. It's now almost disappeared. We've got 12 destroyers and frigates today.
There were the pictures of the fleet at the start of the First World War, and I'm sure
there's warships at all. Like we literally could not do a landing in the Falklands today because we've got no ships to do it. But we sold them. Starmer and the Labour Party just did.
I don't know if you heard the latest news of Chagos Islands. Apparently, the Chinese have a surveillance post.
I bet they have. Yeah, I bet they have.
And it's like you start thinking, hypothetically. I mean, I suppose like that deal, or deal in quote marks. Any serious government would just reverse it. Like, I mean, I suppose you could just easily reverse it because, I mean, what's some of us just going to do? They're going to complain to the UN.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, big deal.
Okay, yeah, serious government over here. That just tells them, okay, go ahead and bitch.
Listen, this so-called deal for the Chagos Islands, which anyone on the chat doesn't know, it's the British Indian Ocean Territory. Starmer is making British taxpayers pay vast amounts of money, like millions and millions and millions of pounds, to give away British territory to Mauritius, who've never owned it. And it's an important British naval base and air base that the Americans also use, and that British ships use quite frequently, particularly when they're going out to Australia and stuff like that.
I think the UN, whatever, the lawyer, whoever, who sort of pushed that in the UN, Chinese national.
Could well be, man. Could well
Just
be.
working
But
for
I mean,
China,
Starmer's, look, if you don't know that Sir Tutier Sir Keir Starmer is not a traitor, then you don't know anything and you shouldn't be listening to this show. But, you know, whatever. We're getting a long way off Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar. I would just say, guys, if you're a good British person, 21st of October, celebrate Trafalgar Day. And if you've got a white ensign or a St. George's flag or a Union flag, fly it. Because we should all celebrate Trafalgar Day. Nelson did more than any other single person to make Britain the greatest power of the 19th century. And Trafalgar was the basis of much of it, alongside a lot of native British genius in terms of inventions and what have you as well.
Yeah, I suppose you get the whole thing about, you know, some people might say, oh, well, France wanted to invade us, and I go, well, as said earlier, Villeneuve. You know, I mean, to be fair, the French, I mean, you know, you get some alternative history types of like, oh, well, what if that French fleet, instead of Villeneuve crap in the bed, what instead if it went north to Brest and linked up with a fleet then? So, well, that's more wishful thinking because
it would have got intercepted, Mitch. I'm almost certain that another Royal Navy fleet, and there were several. Nelson didn't have the only British fleet. Look at Strachan's action that we talked about earlier. There would have been another British fleet that would have intercepted it.
yeah, because I mean, they say like, you know, Villeneuve, he just kept backing off as soon as he heard what Nelson was even in the same vicinity as him. Like,
well,
you know,
when you look at the results of the battle, was he wrong, Mitch? You know, when you
No,
look
but-
at what happened, was he wrong?
no, it's one of the things where, you know, I mean, I don't know, some French might go, oh, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, like what Villeneuve believed, but then it's also one of the things where, well,
But
it was gonna
when he had, to be fair to Villeneuve, when he had to fight, he fought bravely. He wasn't a coward, not at all. Like, not a physical coward.
But I mean, I don't know about Villeneuve during the battle itself, but I know before the battle, like plenty of some of his own captains wanted to kill him. Like that Captain Roger Talbot wanted to just duel him, whatever, and then he had to be restrained by his own men. So it's kind of like there were internal divisions among the French leading up to the battle. So
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, guys, final thoughts on Nelson and Trafalgar.
That's a tall order. Final thoughts.
I mean, obviously, Nelson is a great British hero who should be celebrated. But apart from that, I mean, final thoughts.
It was definitely something that changed history because it just made Napoleon completely give up on any chance of ever defeating us, really.
Yes. As I say, it gave the Britain command of the world's oceans for at least the next 120 years.
Yeah, which is enormous. I mean, that is literally like a pivotal historical moment if you think about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's when I think back, not to like drag the tone down, but I was kind of think of it in rather sort of tragic terms because it's you know, like we were saying earlier about it being a hero and putting him on a plinth, but it's almost as if he belongs to a different Britain now.
One we should get back, I would say, Adam.
Yeah, hopefully. But
I mean, I think we should look at people like Nelson, like us, much lesser mortals, should look at someone like Nelson and think, well, that's what we should aspire to be.
It's kind of like how in old England they would sometimes look back on various generals from previous empires, like Roman figures and stuff like that, with a great amount of admiration, and they would sort of like sometimes model themselves on parts of sort of Romanesque antiquity, and it's kind of like my grandparents would view Nelson as a member of their people, a member of their ancestry, whereas I kind of can't seem to view him that way. I kind of view him as someone worthy of admiration, but of almost a different empire. It's it yeah, as I say, it's kind of tragic. It's kind of a bizarre sort of paradigm we find ourselves in, especially since it's really not that long ago in sort of grand historical sense. I mean, we did a stream quite a while back on Rorke's Drift, and is it Colour Sergeant Bourne?
Yes.
I'm thinking of the right guy. Yeah, he lived to see like World War II. Like that's
He died just after VE Day.
Yeah, like in really, if you sort of lay it out, a lot of these historical events are actually pretty recent in the grand scheme of things, and yet
to give you an example, Adam, Colour Sergeant Bourne was born probably about 40 years after Nelson died.
Yeah.
So these things are not long. I'll be honest with you, mate. I don't quite understand what you're saying, and of course, I'm much older than you. But I regard King Alfred the Great's warriors as my people.
Mm-hmm. Same.
Really, I just think that we're a continuation of those guys.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think we make a mistake if we don't see that we are the same people. Like Nelson sailors are the same people as the Brits today.
Mm-hmm.
If you put all these what our enemies call gammon on a Royal Navy ship, you'd see how they fought. And indeed, you can go back to the Falklands War not very long ago, and see how they fought there and won.
Yeah.
I'm really quite strong on this. We must not run ourselves down as modern people. I think modern Brits would do just as well given good leadership.
Yeah.
Like Nelson, for example, because Nelson was a great leader. That's one of the things he was.
I mean, like, you might be looking around today and be discouraged by that, but we've always had normies, right? Yeah. There was always, most people were normies, like the real, giga chads. That was always a minority. But the normies we're still a bit from them.
The normies are waking up, Therium. That's the other thing. Things are going our way today in terms of the Overton window and the public debate and what have you. Everything is going our way. We're winning.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I know AA is doing a series where he's repudiating the right at the moment, and I don't know why he's doing that, unless he's trying to save his YouTube channel or something. But I watched his one about nationalism today, and I just thought, why the fuck did you waste your time making that? Unless you're a great big massive empire, you can't be nationalist. Well, I'm sorry, I don't believe that's true at all.
Mm-hmm.
It might be if you're Chad or I don't know, Nigeria or fucking Pakistan. Yeah, probably. Or Iran, I might add. But Britain isn't any of those countries. And we can be nationalists. And are we part of the American empire at the moment? Yeah, you bet you we are. Do we have to be? No.
I mean, all I'll say on it is Royal Biscuits, who's sometimes in our chat, he said to me before that he thinks that AA losing John Dee of all people was a massive downgrade for him because he hasn't got anyone to keep him. Hasn't got anyone to keep on the straight and narrow anymore. But
imagine John Dee keeping you straight.
The irony. And
listen, I actually don't mind John Dee. I occasionally listen to his streams on X on Twitter, and I don't mind John Dee. And I actually think that what Alman said there and Raw Biscuits said is probably true. Actually,
but I mean, like, you say about us winning. I mean, it does kind of seem like the regime senses itself as being more fragile than ever, but it's actually stronger than ever. But the thing is, like, to bring that back to this is that it's one thing that people are like getting angry about immigration, but it's another thing that they still don't quite feel that connection to their ancestors that they would have done in previous age that
Sure.
would have given them so much strength.
Mhm.
And I don't know how you reignite that.
I learned about Nelson at school, okay, in the early 1970s. I learned about Nelson at school. I don't suppose you guys do now.
Not really. I don't think so. No.
Yeah, they really don't cover it much.
Not
I think
really, not really.
no, I mean Peter Hitchens talks about this in Abolition of Britain, doesn't he? He specifically brings up like the Royal Navy of old and talks about how like even like going back to like the 80s, they were like really bastardizing
Sure.
like what it was that made the Navy. Like they would talk about like how dangerous it was on the ships, but they wouldn't talk about like what motivated the men to do these incredible things. You know,
adventure and tradition, and yeah. I mean, if you watch The Cruel Sea, which is a great movie, it's much the best film about the Royal Navy in World War II. Yeah, and it's about a little corvette, and later on a slightly bigger corvette. So no battleships or anything. It's just a little escort ship, you know. At the beginning of that film, it says, something like, of a nation that its greatest glory is its navy. And that film was made in 1953, so that was still alive then. It ain't now, not at all. I think most British people don't even realise that Britain's an island, for fuck's sake, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously, this has come off the back of you doing this review of Master and Commander. I mean, I love Master and Commander, the film, and
Great film. Yeah.
But it's a bit of a unique film in that, like, obviously most people sit around and go, couldn't make that today. It was shocking they were able to make that then. It was not because it's outlandishly or so absurdly anti-political correctness, but just because it's representing a sort of deeply masculine space.
And
as being a place of like extreme Anglo extreme Anglo quality I've lost the words I was looking for, but yeah, it's an unusual film in that
It's
regard.
like with the Bridge Too Far film, they had to sort of play us down and play up the Americans.
Yes.
It wasn't how it really happened.
No, that wasn't. We if you want to know the story of that, by the way, people in the chat, we have a stream on the Battle of Arnhem. Go and check it. It tells the real story of the Battle of Arnhem, which was not the British were fuck ups and the Americans were great, let me tell you. But anyway. Oh, by the way, I've got a history stream I want to recommend to everyone in the chat. My friend Horace, who is a very good chap, who I've streamed with many times, several times, and I want to stream with again. He did a brilliant stream today. Really, really good. It's one of the best history streams I have seen in quite a long time. And I'm just going to check it because I need to give you the right title for it. 1 second, guys. Forgive the dead air. I know it's a terrible stream. Yeah, it's called Churchill's Secret War Pie by Horace. And he's Infinite Horace, by the way, if you're on X on Twitter.
Do you want me to link it in the chat for people?
Yeah, if you want to, Adam, and if you can put it up I'll put it up on the stream. I listened to this. It's about 2.5 hours. But it's one of the best history streams I've listened to in a very long time. And Adam has linked it in the chat there. Horace, and it's called Churchill's Secret War Pie. Really good history stream. And I, as I say, Horace is a friend of mine. I like streaming with him. And this thing, there's nothing in it that I could say is not accurate. It's all accurate, really good, Check it out. It's good. It's not pro-Churchill, but then I'm not pro-Churchill either. I think Churchill was an arsehole, but there we go. Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to talk about before we move on to look at if we've got any super chats?
No, nothing from me.
All right, guys. Let me just put that up. Let me see. Do we have anything on entropy? Oh, bloody hell. Allreality, who is a member of my Discord and shouldn't be sending me money, has sent me $15 US and said she subscribed. Well, she subscribed anyway, but yeah, she's in my Discord. Allreality has been on my streams quite a few times. So, yeah. Thank you very much, Allreality. It's most generous of you, but I wish you hadn't done it. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, do check out Horace Churchill's Secret War Party on YouTube. I think it was also on X as well. But that was a really good 2.5 hour history stream, and Horace did it on his own. And I was saying to the guys before I did this stream, I mean, I can do this stream in terms of knowing about the Battle of Trafalgar, but I just don't want to drone on for 2 hours, you know. So I needed some guests. But yeah, true. So yeah, check that out, guys. It's a great history stream. We will be back on Wednesday. On Saturday with our normal Splendid Isolation stream, which is going to be about politics, current affairs, and news. Not sure what we're doing next Wednesday in terms of history yet. So watch this space. When I know, I'll give people some warning. On the 21st of October, which is Trafalgar Day, which I think is Tuesday next week, do remember to raise a glass and toast Admiral Lord Nelson and the Royal Navy, because they're still the main shield of Britain. They're just very thin these days. So yeah. All right, guys. Did any of you chaps have anything you wanted to plug, by the way?
No, nothing from me.
No.
All right, guys. In that case, I'm going to try and play us out with tune if it plays. Let's see if it does. There we go. Okay. Oh. One second, guys. I'm sorry. Hopefully this will work.
Bull Nelson's praise I'm going to sing, not forgetting our glorious king. He always did good tidings bring, for he was a good commander. There's Sidney Smith and Duncan too, Lord Hume and all the jovial crew, and they were the men that were true blue, full of care, yet I swear none with Nelson could compare, not even Alexander. Lord Nelson, he was threatened to wine, but many a time he had been tried. He fought like a hero till he died. that's the man for old England. He faced his foe with his sword in hand, and he lived and he died in glory. Bonaparte, he threatened war, a man who feared not wound or scar, but still he found that Trafalgar, where Britain was victorious. Lord Nelson's actions made him quake, and all French powers he made to shake. He said his king he'd never forsake. These last words there he spoke: stand true, my lads, like hearts of oak, and the battle shall be glorious.
And that was Bold Nelson's Praise, which is an English folk song, by the way. So that was ordinary guys singing about Nelson, who was a true British hero. One final story about Lord Nelson. One night, when it was freezing cold, he was in an open rowboat and being rowed from his ship. And someone said, "Would you like a cloak, sir, to keep you warm?" And Nelson said, "No." He said, "My zeal for my king and country keeps me warm." And that's in the Master and Commander movie, but it's a true story of Nelson. And yeah, Nelson was just that kind of superhero type guy. He really was. So yeah, on 21st of October, Trafalgar Day, if you're a British person, splice the main brace, because you should. It was a great day for Britain, and just, it needs to be continued to be celebrated. All right, guys, go well. Don't let the bastards grind you down, and we'll see you the same time on Saturday evening British time. Go well.